Court of Justice of Brazil, STJ, Superior Tribunal de Justiça, and the several partners that you all see on the brochure. As we know, forests are absolutely critical to countries, to the planet, and to people. Millions of people depend on forests directly. And the whole humanity depends on forests indirectly, especially because of the role that forests play in the climate system. This is a moment of not just climate change crisis, but also of forest crisis. And among the different perspectives that forests invite us to address, one of them is definitely the legal perspective. Therefore, we thought the different partners of the Model Forest Act initiative, my court, the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, and all other partners of this event, we decided that it would be important on this day to have a 2-hour discussion on the legal aspects of the protection of forests. The United Nations Forum on Forests has taken the lead in addressing some of those issues. The same thing with IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the Asian Development Bank, within its celebrated judicial work in Asia and the Pacific, judges from different countries, and I see here several of those leading judges from different parts of the world. We are all together in understanding the relevance of forest and concern with the legal framework that protects forests nationally, locally, and internationally. This event comes within the umbrella of a program of my court, the STJ, STJ. It's called STJ COP 30. It is in fact the first activity of this type, a virtual one, that we organize. There will be several others during the year addressing different aspects of climate change. But I believe that we are starting with the right topic, which is the protection of forests. This program is webcast on YouTube. It is recorded on Zoom. There is interpretation into English and Portuguese. You just need to click on one of those icons that you see on your screen. Most of it will be in English, but the Brazilians and the Portuguese-speaking participants can have simultaneous translation. We will begin with, but I don't see her here yet. Yes, Minister Marina Silva is with us, and it is a great pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Senator Congresswoman Marina Silva is an iconic figure in Brazil and in other parts of the world. And I'll switch to Portuguese now. Marina Silva representa o que o
Marina
Brasil tem de
Silva
melhor
represents what Brazil
sua história,
has of best
pelo
to
seu
offer
trabalho,
because of her
pela
history,
sua
her
perseverança,
work, her
pela sua
perseverance,
credibilidade
her
e,
credibility,
sobretudo, pelo seu compromisso
and
ético
especially
com as
because of her
pessoas e com
ethical
as gerações futuras,
dedication
com a
with people,
comunidade da
future
Amazônia.
generations, and
É alguém
quality
que tem
of
feito
life.
muito
She's a person that has
pela
been doing
proteção do meio
a
ambiente
lot
no
for
Brasil,
the protection of the
em
environment
especial na
in Brazil,
Amazônia, mas em
especially
outras
in the
regiões
Amazon,
também,
but in the other
e cada vez
environments as
mais
well.
com uma preocupação regional
And she
sobre a
has
Amazônia.
been having regional concerns
Nós não
even
poderíamos
more
ter no Brasil
for the
ocasiões
Amazon and
parecidas
globally as
sem
well. We could not have
a
a better
ministra
spokesperson
Marina Silva.
than Marina Silva in
E sem
Brazil for
mais,
such issues.
passo a palavra
So without
a
further
esta
ado, I pass
grande
on the floor
especialista
to
sobre a
this
floresta
great
ou a
specialist on
floresta.
forests.
E ela é especialista porque ela nasceu
And
na
she's a
floresta
specialist
amazônica.
because she was born in the Amazon
Não
forest.
é alguém que fala sobre a
It
floresta
is not someone who
amazônica
speaks
porque leu
about
nos
the
livros,
Amazon
viu
forest
na
because she's
televisão,
read it in the
viu
books
no
or saw
rádio
it on
ou
the
nas redes
TV or
sociais.
heard it on the radio or
Marina
social media.
Silva tem uma
Marina Silva
simbólica história de vida
has a
que
beautiful life
inspira
story
meninas,
that inspires
jovens,
girls,
mas
young
também
people,
homens
but also men,
do nosso país,
men of our
todos e
country,
todas
everyone,
brasileiras e brasileiros.
Brazilians,
E é com
and
muita
all.
alegria e ao mesmo tempo
So it's with great
agradecendo
joy
a
and
Sua
at the same
Excelência, que
time
tem uma agenda
thanking Her Excellency
extremamente
that has an extremely busy schedule
recheada de compromissos importantes,
full of
que eu
important
passo a palavra
engagements
à
that I now
ministra Marina
hand the
Silva.
floor to Minister Marina Silva. Thank you, Chief Justice Herman, my dear friend. Thank you very much for your kind and generous words. First of all, I would like to wish you a good morning, afternoon, and evening to all who are following us here online. And to say that it's a great joy to be able to participate in this important seminary on such a special day, such as the International Forest Day. And I would like to greet very especially my dear friend, Chief Justice Antonio Herman Benjamin, Magister for Environment and Minister and Justice of the National Superior Justice Court, and who has been instrumental in the protection of forests worldwide, but especially in the legal side of things and the contribution he has made for the protection of our forests here in Brazil. I would also like to greet Dr. Juliet, Director of the Secretariat of the Forum of the UN about Forests, for her untiring work to help with forest governance and have concrete actions for the ecosystems of forests. I would also like to greet Dr. Villa, General Director of the Conservation of Nature, whose actions have been crucial for the defense of biodiversity and the development of conservation strategies of biodiversity of forests in general. First of all, I would like to emphasize, I'd like to emphasize the initiative of the forest model or model of forest because of its innovative work on legislative and legal issues for the restoration, sustainable management of forests, with special attention to native forests and its vegetation. And Justice Herman, Your Excellency knows me well as a president of the SCJ, but with all the functions of and roles you've had before, I would like to talk about the experience. All of your work at the STJ has been really satisfying to see that we have someone with your commitment and leading us in the legal area and the decision processes in justice. I've always said that we must lead by example. Leading by example is possibly the biggest challenge of the 21st century for companies, the academy, justice, parliament, and especially for the executive branch. And here in Brazil, since 2003, we've been having an experience that innovative from the point of view of how it approaches it, but also very promising from a point of view of the results it has had. That was in 2003 when we had the plan on prevention and control of deforestation of the Amazon. At that time, the deforestation had reached the highest destruction rates of the forest here in Brazil. The biggest rate had been in 95 with 29,000 square kilometers of destroyed forest. And in 2004, we reached 27,000 square kilometers. And in 2003, when President Lula took on the executive, we saw this huge increase. And we proposed, myself and my team proposed a different approach that has a driving concept behind it. That is that environmental policy cannot be a sectorial policy, but must be transversal, that involves all the sectors of the government. And we decided to apply this directive to fighting deforestation in such a difficult context as it was then. We took an entire year to actually put together this plan, but with financial resources, technological monitoring systems, and a transversal approach that involved 13 ministries working together with an executive coordination of the Ministry of Environment. The result of this effort that was based on three main directives: fighting illegal activity, support of the sustainable activities, and territorial organization, with a huge emphasis on canceling areas that had been illegally occupied and the creation of conservation units, where during the period from 2003 to 2008, we created 25 million hectares of protected areas in Brazil. And this integrated work that was done with these directives that I have made allusion to, we managed to have a reduction of deforestation in up to 83% for up to 10 years. Once these policies started being weakened, there was a growth, but it was still an increase that wasn't terribly frightening until we arrived at 2019 with a government that had no environmental concern whatsoever, and deforestation started getting out of control again. Just to have an idea, we went from 27,000 square kilometers in 2004 and then to the lowest rate that was to 4,600 square kilometers. So we managed to get a really significant result. When I came back, once more deforestation was out of control, not just on the Amazon, but in the Cerrado, the Caatinga, and the Atlantic forest and rainforest. And we started putting into place initiatives once ago. Now, not 13 ministries again, but 9, and no longer just the territorial organization supporting sustainable activities and the control agenda fighting illegal activities, but also a directive with economic and legal instruments that has a lot to do with what we're doing here obviously adapted to the reality of each country. And as a result of all this, we managed in the past 2 years already get a reduction of deforestation of 46% in the Amazon compared to 2022. And now the government's plan is that this must be in effect in all the Brazilian biomes, Cerrado, Caatinga, Atlantic rainforest, and the wetlands. And we have plans that are already being implemented, established the majority of the biomes, where we're just missing the Pampa and the Atlantic rainforest, but they will start being implemented now. And in the Cerrado, we've also had a reduction of deforestation of up to 47%. In the Pantanal, the wetlands, the last data is that we had a reduction of 77%, and in the rest of the biomes as well, about 13% in the Caatinga and 26% in the Atlantic rainforest. This is the result of an integrated work, and that involves regulatory framework, economic tools geared towards sustainable development, territorial organization, valuing local communities, payments for ecosystem services. We have a financial tool is called green tool that is destined to people and communities that manage forests in a sustainable way. We've reached up to 56,000 families. We have a total of over 100,000 families undertaking these activities, and we want to reach 100% of payments for ecosystem services that they render to the world and in particular to Brazil. In order to reach these results, we have an increase of our monitoring capacity involving direct approach with technology that has remote embargoes, where we had an increase of 97% of our ability of monitoring by the monitoring body. In this case, the organization that deals with the conservation unit, almost 200% increase. We've increased our resources, and thus we've increased our action in the action fighting the bushfires and forest fires. And if we hadn't managed that, it would have been something far worse than what would have taken place last year.
We approved framework regulations to manage fire with the participation of President Herman, of Chief Justice Herman, and it has the contributions of many
Because the
specialists,
law
but
has a
also
participation
of the concrete
several
experience of local
people, especially
communities,
local
especially
communities,
indigenous
indigenous
populations
people,
and the
and
quilombolas.
quilombolas people,
And by luck,
in
when I
such a
talk
way
about
that when I
leading by
talk about
example,
leading by example,
and
lastly, I
finally, I
would
would
like to
like to
give
give emphasis
emphasis
to
to
the
the
commitments we've
commitments
taken
that we've
on
taken on of
of having zero
zero
deforestation in
deforestation
Brazil
up to
until 2030,
2030.
and this
This
commitment is very audacious. It's not easy because the Brazilian legislation allows in each of the biomes that parts of the areas of property owners might be used in a legal way. In the case of the Amazon, you can use 20%. 80% of the property has to be preserved. But we are moving in this direction. We've already had 46% reduction of deforestation, and now we're talking and working on economic instruments. We're creating a global fund for the protection of forests, which is the UNFCCC. This global fund will direct funds to those who have tropical forests, for those who preserve, be it local population, indigenous populations, small farmers, or people who have great properties. as long as they have an extent or excess area that is being preserved. So payment for ecosystemic services for the protection of the forest. Besides that, we are creating other ways of valuing the forests so that they might be preserved, like, for example, the issue of sustainable management, the sustainable acquiring of woods, oil-based seeds, or for restoration, areas that have already been degraded, they do not lose the status of being forests. This is an innovation from our government, because the criminal will put fire, destroy the areas, and then they want Congress to regularize these areas. Since it's been destroyed, let's make it something that can be produced upon. So even if there's an activity that removes the forest, that it should be kept as a forest and to be protected. Those who get those who get concessions in those areas and that are responsible for these areas, they can exchange carbon credits. And we also have the commitment of restoring 12 million hectares. We have restored already 6 million hectares, mostly by natural processes. And now we want to do it by induced processes with native forests. To preserve the forests is, in my understanding, using economic instruments or coordination with many sectors, especially with local communities and indigenous communities. And when we organize the territory, to have a combination of areas that can be used for production and those for full protection, like biological reserves, parks, so forth. Areas that are for the management of natural resources with a view to policies that work for the local population. Another important factor in these protection policies is to have the clarity that the forests are fundamental for climate balance. They are fundamental for ecosystemic services that these forests provide, of biodiversity, equilibrium in microclimate, stabilization of river basins, and our hydrology of each region. Because they have this important role, we've gotten into this initiative to pay for ecosystemic services with an instrument called a Tropical Forest Forever, especially from sovereign funds. And we want, with these resources, these are around $13 million. Part of these resources, these low interest rates, and in coordination with these funds, we can make available this part at a higher interest rate. And what goes over, if it's 4%, and if this goes to credit operations of 6-7%, this excedent would go to a fund that would make payments to preserve forests. So it's many countries are involved. Indonesia, Colombia, and others with tropical forests, Brazil, Malaysia, all these countries working together so that we can put these mechanisms in and to make it work during the COP30. And I'd like to talk about the challenge of COP30. The forests are responsible for 10% of global emissions. Something significant. We are a carbon deposit, but we also can be great consumers of carbon, be it preserved forests or by natural or induced restoration. So that would be 10% our contribution in carbon. 8% come other gases, gas, methane, and especially due to cattle. If we stop deforestation and we don't reduce CO2 emissions by other means, the forests will be destroyed anyway. The lifestyle of the population in the region will be destroyed, and if these forests become or endangered, this could endanger the whole planet. So it is a very complicated geopolitical context, as you know. But like I say, this is a moment we are being called to reinforce multilateralism, especially in terms of climate. And we have the NDCs that are very ambitious. We have NDC until 2035 in the range of 59 to 67%, with the focus on 67%. We are working to reach the 2025, 2030, so that we can get in 2050 with zero emissions. It is an enormous effort with a lot of contradictions that the world is going through, but COP30 has only one term of reference: to implement what came from the global balance and what came from the results of the Paris agreements. Transition to the end of fossil fuels, renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, and 3 trillions, we will have to map the path to reach this objective, and at the same time, not to allow going over 1.5 degrees, which is what the science recommends. I was recently with the president of the IPCC, and he said, "Minister, before I would say we had a window of opportunity, now we have a little gap we can use. So, and we cannot lose this opportunity, and to lead by example, so that we can create a new cycle of prosperity that leaves no one behind in our countries or regions, and to have a robust agenda of financing, training, so that these countries and regions that are more vulnerable can do more." COP30 has an agenda of mobilization, of coordination and diplomacy in climate, so that we, in my opinion, we can have a map so we can leave the fossil fuels, a map to end deforestation, and a joint effort to make viable the means of implementation under threat that our forest objectives might not be reached. So I'd like to congratulate you all and to say that we have to think about a new cycle of prosperity that leaves no one behind, doesn't leave women, Blacks, Indigenous, nor the more vulnerable regions. And I'd like to congratulate once more for this initiative and to say that a good legislation is the one that goes beyond the possible, so that governors and companies can do the possible. If our ideal should be further ahead, otherwise we're never going to leave the same spot. All the efforts being done in Brazil, I could say, are efforts that have been started. We have the plan for ecological transformation, climate, to face deforestation, and sectorial objectives for all sectors of our economy: CO2, energy, agriculture, deforestation, and we also have a plan of adaptation with 16 programs. And I'd like to finish congratulating you all, and thank you for this opportunity to have a dialogue and a special moment Justice Herman, who is our inspiration in the legal debate in how to face climate change and in protecting biodiversity and all of these efforts that we have to do, be in the academia, the private sector, and especially within governments that have greater responsibility. Thank you very much.
Então, eu agradeço à ministra Marina Silva.
So I'd like to thank Minister Marina Silva. I forgot to say that Her Excellency is in Belém, capital of the state of Pará, city which will be the headquarters of the COP30. And even then, Minister Marina Silva accepted participating in this event. I believe the words of Minister Marina Silva give us the path of what we need to do, not only in the political, economic, and ethical planes, but also the legal. And I like to finish with an expression used by the minister in closing her presentation when she mentioned, quotes, that we need a new development model that includes everyone. And of course, the model of development that is not based in the destruction of forests
que permitem a vida
and
e a
that
diversidade.
allows life and diversity in the biosphere.
Ministra, muito obrigado.
Minister,
Sei que Vossa
thank you very
Excelência
much.
tem agenda muito
I know Your
cheia hoje
Excellency
em Belém,
has a very full
nesse
agenda in
esforço do
Belém
governo brasileiro
in this effort of the Brazilian
preparar
government
uma COP
of preparing a
linda,
copy
que tenha substância,
that has substance
enfrente os grandes problemas que nós
and face the great
temos no
challenges
que se refere
that we have,
às mudanças climáticas e, evidentemente, com uma ênfase forte
and
na
of course in
proteção
dealing with
das
climate change
florestas.
and in
Agradeço
protecting the
muito.
forests. I thank you very much. Thank you, Justice Herman, and I also apologize because I had some problem. That was the reality. I was going to go to Belém, but I had a personal problem and I wasn't able to go. And I'm here despite this problem, but I was happy to participate even if remotely. And thank you and all those who are with you in this process. I had to highlight and I had to set other people to go to Belém. Okay, I thank you even more, despite your personal problems, that you are here with us.
Demonstrando o
And
seu
here,
compromisso
demonstrating
com a comunidade
your
internacional.
commitment
Então,
with the
em nome
international
do
community.
STJ,
So, Minister, in the name of the SDJ
das instituições multilaterais
and of the multilateral
participam
institutions
desse
that
evento,
participate in this
quero
event,
deixar os nossos agradecimentos.
I'd
E
like
sem
to
mais, eu passo a palavra
set my
à
thanks.
doutora
And I'd like
Juliette
to
Bial,
hand over to Juliette Bial.
e eu vou agora passar para o inglês.
And now I'll go into
É
English.
diretora geral
She's
do
the
Fórum de
Director
Florestas
General
das
of the
Nações
Forum
Unidas.
of Forests from the UN.
A doutora Juliette Bial é ex-ministra do Meio
Juliette
Ambiente
Bial,
do Benin.
she's the
É alguém
ex-Minister
que
of
conhece
Environment from Benin and
a
someone who
questão
knows
humana
deeply
e
the
natural
human and natural
das várias crises
issues of the
ambientais que nós
various
enfrentamos.
environmental crises that we faced.
E aqueles que a conhecem sabem
And those who know her,
que é uma força da natureza, tem uma
that she
energia
is a
incansável.
force of nature. She is never tired. A great capability, so relevant theme of protecting the forest. Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to receive you here. You have the floor.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Juliet, you need to start from the beginning. You were on mute.
Oh, sorry.
E só para lembrar os brasileiros, nós temos tradução simultânea e é os de língua portuguesa.
Your Excellencies, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and privilege to be here with you today, and I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Honorable Chief Justice Benjamin for inviting me. Let me also extend my apologies, as I will have to leave after delivering my remarks, because I'm hosting today the permanent representative to the United Nations, some country representative to celebrate with us the International Day of Forest. Today, we are celebrating the International Day of Forests, a day which is observed every 21st of March and led by the United Nations Forum on Forests within the UNDESA and the FAO to raise awareness and to promote sustainable management and sustainable development of all types of forests and trees for future, present and future generation. Excellencies, allow me to briefly highlight 5 reasons why this International Day of Forests, which is being held under the theme Food, Forest and Food, is so important. 1, forests feed the world. Around 1.6 billion people, including indigenous communities, rely on forests for food, for fuel, for shelter, for medicine. It was even revealed that 2/3 of cancer-fighting medicine comes from rainforest plants worth $108 billion US. Second, forests can help to achieve zero hunger. Globally, 76 billion tons of food come from forests, 95% of which are plant-based. By sustaining pollinators, regulating water cycles, improving soil erosion, forests can really enhance agricultural productivity. Agroforestry can boost the productivity of our agriculture. 3, sustainable forest management is a climate action. Forests act as carbon sink, and it is known that forests absorb over 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. Number 4 is that forests sustain biodiversity and life on Earth. Our forests are home to over 80% of terrestrial species, supporting ecosystem, which in turn will sustain resilient and healthy food system. And lastly, forests can also help to promote local economies and livelihood. It is known that over 2.5 billion people are relying on forests for their livelihood. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we are celebrating this International Day of Forests today, let us renew our commitment to forests. With sufficient political will and commitment, we can ensure food security, food sovereignty, sustainable livelihood, and healthy planet for present and future generation. A very happy International Day of Forests. Thank you.
Eu agradeço a diretora Bial, como Sua Excelência bem disse.
I would like to thank Your
Nós-
Excellency, as you well said
Nós
and
temos
mentioned.
nas florestas não
We
só
have
reservatório
not just a
de espécies,
We have not just a species reservatory and repository in the forest. As you mentioned, 80% of the species of
mas também
land
uma
species,
importância econômica
but also an economic, spiritual
para milhões de
strength
pessoas.
to millions and for
Esse
millions of
conjunto de
people.
aspectos
And now
e
this
dimensões
group of aspects and dimensions
dificuldades maiores
that
para a
creates
regulação
bigger
jurídica, como
difficulties
nós veremos
for legal
próximo
regulation,
painel.
as we will see in the next panel.
A última
The
speaker
last
de
person
honra, keynote speaker,
that we have here,
Doutora
our last
Gretel
keynote
Aguilar.
speaker, is Dr. Gretel Aguilar.
que é diretora-geral da
That is the General Director of the IUCN
a mais
in English.
antiga e maior instituição
That is the oldest and biggest
de
institution
conservação da natureza do mundo.
for nature conservation in the world.
Seus membros,
That includes among its
não só
members not
países,
just countries,
organismos multilaterais,
multilateral organizations,
organizações científicas,
scientific
ONGs,
organizations, NGOs,
mas também cientistas mais
but
renomados
also
do mundo.
extremely prominent scientists of the world. Dr. Gretel
Greta
Aguilar is herself a specialist in forest rights.
Formada em direito,
She
reconhecida jurídica
is
no mundo todo,
a graduate of
vem de um
law,
país que
renowned in the
se
world,
caracteriza como
in the
modelo de
legal
proteção
world,
das florestas
and is a
Costa Rica,
model
e
for forest
hoje,
protection
como
of
diretora-geral da UICN,
Costa Rica, and today, as a director of the IUCN, lives in Switzerland,
da UICN.
the headquarters
Gostaria que
of
passasse a
IUCN.
palavra à doutora
It is with
Gretel
great
Aguilar.
pleasure that I hand the floor to Dr. Gretel Aguilar.
Muito obrigada. Ministra Marina de Silva, Ministro Antonio Herman Benjamin, Directora Juliette Biao. It is for me really a privilege to chair this panel with all of you. So I want to start by expressing my deepest thanks to Ministro Benjamin for this kind invitation. So forest covers 31% of the global land area of this planet. And I think that we still have to celebrate that half of this forest is relatively intact. On the other hand, we have to do much more because deforestation and forest degradation continues to happen at alarming rates, contributing to loss of biodiversity, but also contributing to poverty. Much as the recent speaker mentioned, much of human society have some relation with forests, and we receive also many benefits from forests, from human health to nutrient cycles to food. I mean, there are many benefits that we today receive from forests. But in recent, and let me go a little bit to legislation. In recent decades, forestry legislation in the world has focused on several objectives and has taken different approaches, from laws and regulations to guarantee the protection of forests and their biodiversity and the establishment of protected areas, to sustainable forest management, with an emphasis on natural forests, and more recently, those that recognize the entirety of forest functions, including goods and environmental services and their impact on society. The growing mobilization of organizations representing civil society and the forest users have highlighted the need to, in one hand, add a human face to this fight to protect forests, and has led us to adjusting regulations to the specific conditions of different users. For example, the needs of indigenous peoples, the needs of local communities, the needs of non-native communities, private producers, state owners of lands, and others that work with forests. So this means regulate based on governing systems that integrate the criteria, decisions, and interests of different actors involved. It is paradoxical that the loss of forests covers some parts of the world that are really in high levels of poverty. Now, if we add that to forest fires, the advance of the agricultural frontier, and natural events such as hurricanes, of course, we have to think about people, because forest is not isolated from people. So the question that becomes clear is, why has forestry legislation been in a situation that sometimes can contribute, but sometimes different sectors find it a little bit heavy? So we need to consider that forest legislation, how to contribute to sustainable land use, to soil conservation, to manage, I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble here, to manage protected areas that clearly recognize the rights of indigenous peoples and the protection of biodiversity, taking into account the linkages between biodiversity, agriculture, food security, and adaptation to climate change. As the Minister Marina Silva indicated, we need transversal policies and regulations that touch all sectors. The whole idea that the regulations related to forests touch only the ministers of environment and some industries is something from the past. So forestry laws and regulations and everything we do around forests needs to touch all sectors. So yes, forests cannot be seen through one sole lens. Although most countries have forest laws and policies, these in most cases need to be coordinated with other sectors and regulations. There is an increasing and urgent need for interdisciplinary and coordinated work between laws, investments, and policies of diverse sectors, such as water, land planning, agriculture, biodiversity, genetic resources, and trade, including the fundamental role of customary law. We must promote multi-sectoral dialogues and exchange best practices for improving law compliance in the forest sector as fundamental tools to achieve sustainable development and forest conservation. Actions to improve forest law compliance should be also based on the assessment of the causes of deforestation, such that conversion of forests for large-scale agriculture, the uncontrolled expansion on urban areas, the illegal and unsustainable development, and the needs for transparent processes. And a strong civil society plays an important role. There is also a need for worldwide and regional approaches to address illegal trade across borders. Adequate enforcement can be a driver of sustainable economic and environmental development. We must consider all streams to comply with the achievement of global commitments made by countries of the world. It is important also to say that in general terms, more than half of the world forests are found in 5 countries: Russia, Canada, United States, China, and of course, beautiful Brazil. And then the remaining 6% is found in other 10 countries. So if we want to take a look worldwide to the planet, there is a very important group of countries that are doing good work, that need desperately to continue doing this work, and also need to continue improving what they do. And the hope is, and I am really, really hopeful with this, the hope is that we humans, we were capable to put the planet in the situation we are today, but we are so capable of doing the right thing. And this is the time to take that path, that journey. And I know that we can, because some of the countries that are involved in this, like Brazil, have everything with them to make it, and are leading by example. As the minister said, walking the talk, no? And this is very important, and I want to praise Brazil for showing the way and for being so strong in their lines of how they are protecting forests, but at the same time benefiting people and working with different sectors. So let me just finish by saying that there are some parts of this that needs to be really taken in consideration. First, forest legislation and planning with a landscape focus. This is not about one piece here and another piece there. It's about a landscape approach where forest resources are part of the mosaic of ecosystems that make up landscapes, and that units upon which the communities, producers, families, and the urban population, and in general society depend. Second, forest legislation, land use planning, land tenancy, and access to natural resources. We need clarity on land ownership, access to the rights of the people, and this has proved all around the world that when there is clarity on land ownership, people care, and people take care of the land. So this is very important, particularly, I will say, in Latin America. I am from Latin America, and I have to say that in Latin America, 33% of the forest land with formal tenancy are administered by the state. The forestry sector also, food security and the fight against poverty play an important role. Forest resources are an intrinsic part of the livelihoods of many diverse producers, communities, and families. Agriculture, the forest, and trees in agroforestry systems are intimately linked to food security, water conservation, soil conservation, and the worldview of indigenous peoples groups. And then lastly, our legal systems need to be at the service of people, and people need to be able to access justice. People need to have legal tools on the side. Forest legislation has been generating many regulations in different countries around the world, but some of them, for some reason, are difficult to understand or difficult to apply because costly mechanisms that people find expensive. Some others, they need more rapid action. So there is much to do, but I also have to applaud, and I want to be clear about this, how much we have advanced. I mean, I remember, and Minister Benjamin, I'm sure remember when, 25 years back, we were just discussing about doing constitutional changes to regulate a healthy environment. And then the first new forestry laws appear. So from that time to today, I truly believe that we have advanced a lot, but there is much to be done. especially bringing law closer to people. And let me just finish with the need, again, to intersectional regulations and policies. This is not a one sector job. This is a nation effort, needs to be a nation effort, needs to be a planetary effort where all sectors have a role to play. Good governance, of course, will be hand in hand with this idea of including all sectors as part of the solution. So just to conclude, I want to say that there is much we can do. There is much we have advanced. This is a good day to reflect that we receive so much benefits from the forest. The forest is an integral part of our societies. I don't think that, you know, there is one person in this planet that haven't seen a tree, a forest, and that has benefit from it. There is the opportunity now to continue advancing with good legislation, but a legislation that responds to the specific needs of the population where that forest is. As much as we, of course, can have general rules, regulations for the whole planet, because we need that. We need some models that we can follow. But besides that, we need to respond to the needs of the local people. And I would like to finish with that, with a big thanks to Minister Antonio Benjamin for his invitation. I feel really honored to be with all of you today. Thank you very much.
Eu agradeço a doutora Gretel Aguilar. Como viram, é uma
I thank
especialista
Dr.
nos temas
Gretel Aguilar. As you saw, she's a specialist on this subject. What I found interesting is the convergence between the different speeches of the three keynote speakers we have had.
Enfatizando a necessidade
Minister Marina Silva started emphasizing the look of a transversal look on the protection of forests. This is a recurring subject in terms of Minister Silva's speeches ever since I've met her. Far before she was someone in the judiciary or in government spoke about transversality, Marina Silva was already saying that the forest requires that we have different onlooks and sectors. And Dr. Aguilar just mentioned this. And open quotes, that we have a global onlook to the planet, close quotes, regarding forest protection. We cannot protect a hectare of forest thinking that will destroy a hectare. That can only be done or only has local repercussions. It has to be a global planetary approach, as Dr. Aguilar mentioned. When she also emphasized that we cannot forget that despite all the difficulties of the problems of the continuing colossal deforestation, we have nevertheless advanced a lot. Without the legislation that we have and the effects it's had, there is no doubt that the forest would be far worse off nowadays. We conclude, therefore, this first roundtable exactly perfectly on time. I'd like to thank Minister Marina Silva, Director Juliette Bial, and also General Director Greta Aguilar for her intervention today. Wishing you all a good morning and a good afternoon.
Em seguida, nós teremos
We will now have a round table
ser coordenada, presidida
coordinated and
pelo
presided
professor
by
Nicholas Breiner,
Professor Nicholas
que é
Breiner,
professor
that
da
is
Faculdade de Direito
a professor
da
of
Louisiana
the
State
Law School of
University.
the
É
Louisiana State
especialista em
University.
direito
He is a
ambiental
specialist in
e
environmental
dos
rights
relatores gerais
and one of the general
da Lei Florestal Modelo, que será objeto
writers
de
of the model
exposição de
forest
colegas
law, the MOFI. There will be
que falarão em seguida, em
parts
especial
of what the colleagues that
da
will
doutora
speak
Cristina
afterwards,
Pack.
especially of
Sem mais, eu
Dr.
passo a
Christina Pack.
palavra ao
Without further ado,
professor
I
Nicholas
hand
Breiner.
over to Professor Nicholas Breiner.
Muito obrigado. Bom dia a todas e a todos. Obrigado, ministro
Thank you.
Benjamin, pela apresentação.
Thank you all,
E
Minister
por essas palavras
Benjamin,
tão importantes para
and for
começar
these
esse
important
evento.
words in
Eu
order
quero
to start this
agradecer
event.
outra vez
I'd also like to thank once more
todos os participantes, todos que nos
all of the
acompanham nesse dia
participants
importante
that
Dia
are
Internacional de
following us
Florestas.
in
É
this
dia
International Day of
mais
the
especial, o
Forest,
dia mais importante para
of this special day
falarmos desse assunto.
for us to talk
Principalmente
about
para
this
falar
subject
da
and
importância
especially
da
to talk
da
about the
cooperação
importance
global
of global
e o
cooperation
esforço global,
and
porque os três
and
palestrantes têm
global
falado
effort.
para nós
All speakers
hoje
have
no
talked
início
to
desse
us
evento.
in the beginning of this event, of what they
Começo
told
a
us in the
segunda
beginning of this
fase
event,
dessa
to
mesa
start the
redonda.
second
Vamos
part of this
falar, vamos tratar
roundtable.
das tendências
Let's
e
talk
desafios
about the
globais no
tendencies
direito
and
das
global
florestas.
challenges.
Como relator
As
da
the
iniciativa da Lei Modelo
rapporteur
de Florestas, temos
of the
tido várias oportunidades
Model
para
Forest
isso,
Act
atividades
initiative,
para
we've
consultar
had many
os
activities and
interessados
possibilities
na reforma de direito
of those
das
that are
florestas
interested
sobre o
in
mundo todo.
reforming
E
the laws all over
esses
the world.
discussantes agora
And these
vão
discussions
falar para nós, vão
will
tratar
tell
da
us
importância
and
dessa
deal with the
iniciativa
importance
e
of this
também das
initiative
outras tendências e
and
desafios
the other
no
tendencies
processo de reformar o direito das florestas
and
para lidar
reforming
com os desafios
the
mais
law that
importantes do século
regards the
XXI,
forest to deal with the
seriam
most important
mudanças
challenges
climáticas
of the
e a
21st century,
biodiversidade.
which is
Então,
climate
sem
change and
mais alongada, eu
biodiversity.
vou começar essa
So
mesa
without
redonda
further ado, I will
apresentando
start this
primeiro,
roundtable
de novo, o
presenting
ministro
first
presidente Antônio Herman
the
Benjamin,
minister,
presidente do
or
STJ
Justice
e
Herman
do Global
Benjamin,
Judicial Institute on the Environment,
and
que
the
vai
Global
dar
Justice
os
of the
primeiros
Environment.
iniciativos para a mesa redonda.
He will
Ministro.
start with the first initiatives for the roundtable. You have the floor, Justice.
Thank you very much. Professor Breiner, as you can see, he speaks, oh, we do have an interference. Yeah, we have someone speaking.
Per è uguale, non so come è previsto in generale per l'evento.
My apologies. I had an issue with the microphone. So as I was saying, Professor Breiner speaks better Portuguese than I do. In any event, I will speak in English in order to facilitate the work of the interpreters. In this panel, we will be discussing forests and law, global trends. I'll speak for only 10 minutes. I'm more interested in listening to the other colleagues in the panel. And among the difficulties of the legal protection of forests, I would like to emphasize just a few. The first difficulty is a wrong perception that we have and we still have about forests. It is a wrong ethical, scientific, economic, and legal perception of forests. Forests culturally, and historically have been seen as a barrier to economic progress. In some parts of the world, they are still seen as an enemy. And if something is an enemy, it is there to be destroyed, to be replaced. This is not a legal barrier. This is a cultural and historical barrier, but it has huge implications either to the design of the legal system or to the implementation of the legal system. The second barrier, this is more legal, is that in many parts of the world, forests are still protected by laws that were enacted decades ago, and in some cases, over a century ago. India, until recently, had forest legislation from the time of the Raj. Bangladesh still does. The legislation of Bangladesh is the one that was enacted in the 1920s. It has been reformed, but it is still that text. And of course, a legislation about forests that is that old cannot incorporate the more recent objectives that we identify, or values that we identify with forest as a reservoir of biodiversity, or its relevance for or in the context of climate change. The third barrier is that even recent laws often are badly drafted. Contradictions, gaps, vague provisions with no teeth, more of a type of statement of public policy. And as we know, in this area, we need precise norms and norms that are enforceable. Another problem is that forest legislation is usually fragmented in a number of ways. It is fragmented because it deals with forests, the canopy, and leaves everything else outside. For example, grasslands, the savanna, mangroves. It is fragmented in respect to the instruments. Some instruments are there, but other instruments that are highly important for the implementation are in other statutes, in the Civil Procedure Code, in the Criminal Procedure Code, in the Criminal Code. It's also fragmented, it's another barrier, from an institutional perspective. It's not unusual to have one agency with the responsibility of protecting biodiversity and forests, and another agency with the responsibility of taking care of the land that is covered by forest. This is not the case in Latin America, but in many parts of Africa and Asia, land that is covered by forest belongs to the state. Therefore, there is an agency that either is supposed to take care of that land, but in fact, being the property owner, has huge power in assigning that land to be used for example, for plantations. And finally, the fragmentation has to do with the knowledge about the legal system. Because the more complex, the more fragmented, the older is the legal system, the more difficult is to convey knowledge about this mosaic of norms. In conclusion, in many countries, the whole legal system is not very favorable to the protection of forests, even in countries that have specific forest legislation. And that's one of the reasons why I proposed the Model Forest Act initiative that is now in place, work in progress, as my colleague Christina Pack will explain. The purpose or the goal that we have is, one, to address those issues, those barriers that I alluded to, and second, to make sure that we have in a single text the very best of the knowledge of the regulation of the protection of forests around the world. I end with a note on an aspect that to me is hugely important, which is the need to address the enforcement gap in both drafting forest legislation and in teaching, training programs. We need to have a coherent system of substantive rights and obligations, principles, objectives, instruments, but also a good set of norms that will guarantee the enforcement, the implementation of those rights and obligations. And the stakeholders need to know about those rights and obligations, because otherwise the text will be just law in the books, and forests doesn't need or don't need law in the books. Professor Boraina, thank you very much, and I stop here.
Thank you very much, Justice Benjamin, for that presentation, and in particular highlighting the challenge of updating old laws that are fragmented in order to address the important gaps of the 21st century. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Patricia Kamari-Mbote, Director of the Law Division of the UN Environment Program and former Dean of the University of Nairobi. And I'll also invite her to speak and give introductory remarks, and then we'll proceed from there.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. I would like to start by thanking Chief Justice Antonio Hammond Benjamin for convening this wonderful group of colleagues and friends to celebrate the International Day of Forests. We have heard a lot and read a lot about the vitality of forests, the lungs and heartbeat of our planet, and the role for our well-being, livelihoods, and climate. Undeniably, the law needs to play a leading role in protecting forests by establishing what Chief Justice Benjamin is calling norms, rules, regulations, enforcement mechanisms to prevent deforestation, promote conservation, and ensure sustainable use of forest resources. Many of the initial forest laws predate sustainable development imperatives And while countries have revised their laws, as Nick has said, the objectives, goals, and tools used in forest legislation continue to evolve from the protectionist exploitation models to imbue sustainability imperatives. Effective forest legal protection is currently scattered in a myriad of frameworks, from biodiversity and wildlife laws, the regulation of logging and curbing deforestation, the protection of indigenous, tribal, and local communities' rights, climate change laws, land use planning, and putting in place mechanisms towards effective implementation, enforcement, and monitoring, among others. As a concrete example, the Republic of Congo passed a law in 2020 to help ensure more sustainable management of the country's vast forests, which form part of the Congo Basin, the second largest tropical rainforest in the world after the Amazon. Strong national laws to preserve forests are an effective way to combat forest exploitation and illegal logging. Aligned and complementary to strong laws is the need for strong implementation and enforcement. And this is why it is so important to have this conversation with judges from around the world. Forest laws are indeed a pathway for raising forest coverage and forest biological diversity. They can promote forest health and vitality, productive functions of forest resources, protective functions of forest resources, and socioeconomic functions of the forests. The environmental rule of law, which is the principles of the rule of law applied to the environmental context, is the foundation of these scattered laws, policies, and rules, and their implementation and enforcement. The core elements of the environmental rule of law are critical for sustainable forest management. These include and are not limited to fair, clear, implementable laws, access to information, accountability and integrity of institutions, clear and coordinated mandates and roles, recognition of the relationship with rights, and specific criteria for interpretation. On rights to forest land and to forest resources, traditional forest legislation glossed over forest tenure, leaning towards state or government ownership, even when there were people living in the forests. More recent laws recognize village and community forests and support the transfer of forest management to communities and participatory forest management. Another problematic issue is the value of forests, where the recognition of the value and contribution of forests is limited to contribution to the gross domestic product, with other values being undermined by underestimation. For instance, forest ecosystem services and goods have been excluded, and contributions of forests to other sectors not captured by national accounting systems. They are either excluded or they are grossly undervalued. This is demonstrated by the total economic valuation of forest exploitation or forests in infrastructure development. Let me expand on a couple of other important considerations, and I think I will not belabor the issue of indigenous peoples because Minister Maria Silva talked a lot about this. But indigenous people and forest-dwelling communities are often at the heart of conservation efforts because conserving unique biodiversity relies on their knowledge, innovations, and practices. Recognizing their stewardship and rights, including the right to free, prior, and informed consent, is needed to build strong governance frameworks. Additionally, significant barriers also hinder the involvement of women in environmental and forest governance. And here we have women not included in participation and their agency not acknowledged. We also have predominance of traditional gender roles in land access and ownership and resource management, leading to insecure tenure. Women also suffer from insecurity and lack of safety in accessing forests, and there is absence of fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Youth engagement is also vital, and here I'd like to talk about the intersectionality of Indigenous people, women, and youth, because youth and women are also part of Indigenous communities. And it is important to engage youth for both intra and intergenerational equity. And we see around the world communities and individuals going to court. Young people are going to court, and in 2018, a group of young people in Colombia filed a constitutional claim on behalf of themselves and future generations, arguing that the government's failure to address rapid deforestation of the Amazon violated their right to health, water, food, and to a healthy environment. Invoking the principle of intergenerational equity, the Supreme Court found that present and future generations hold fundamental rights to a healthy environment based on the fact that natural resources are shared by all of the inhabitants of planet Earth and by descendants and generations to come. The court also connected rights of future generations to the intrinsic value of nature and the need for an ecocentric, anthropic approach, which places humans on a par with the environment. And this follows from the age-old case of miners Oposa against the Secretary General of Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Again, this is a case where children went to court, and the person spearheading that is known to many of us, Antonio Oposa. And there we can go on and on. There's another case in the Constitutional Court of Ecuador where the court interpreted its constitutional provision on rights of nature to prohibit mining and other extractive activities in the protected forests. The elements I have highlighted are related to key pillars of the environmental rule of law, and this has its genesis in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. Further afield at the international level, we have the UN RED program, a framework created by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And this is helping countries to turn their political commitments as represented in their nationally determined contributions into real action on the ground. And to date, 118 countries have included forest and land use in their nationally determined contributions. Pledges, and UNEP and partners are working with more than 60 countries to support them in being REDD+ ready. Again, there is the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, a rallying call for the protection and revival of ecosystems around the world for the benefit of people and nature. It aims to halt degradation of ecosystems and restore them to achieve global goals. Between now and 2030, the restoration of 350 million hectares of degraded terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems could generate $9 trillion in ecosystem services. Restoration could also remove 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. This explains why the Model Forest Law initiative is so important. It recognizes the specific role of restoration and looks at forests in their wider global ecosystem typology. Within this context, then, we do not need to belabor the importance of these initiatives, which Christina will talk about. UNEP remains committed, as ever, to the development of this Model Forest Act, and recognizes the interdisciplinary approaches that it has taken based on scientific evidence and bringing in legal innovations from around the world, while simultaneously recognizing the role of key groups and communities around the forest ecosystem to ensure that the model law, when completed, is adopted and does not, as Judge Benjamin has talked to us, remain on the shelves and gather dust. UNEP and partners are also looking forward to support member states in implementing the Act, including through the Montevideo Environmental Law Program, which is UNEP's flagship program on environmental law, providing technical assistance to countries to put in place effective legal frameworks. I leave you with an appeal. We have 5 years to go to 2030, and protecting the world's forests is crucial to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Forests provide an array of critically important ecosystem services, including habitat for biodiversity of global significance and livelihoods for vulnerable and indigenous communities. Investing in forests not only addresses climate change and biodiversity loss, but also offers substantial economic returns and job creation opportunities. By prioritizing forests in global political agendas, we can ensure a sustainable future for all, both people and the planet. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Kamarimbote, for those words and for reminding us of the importance of looking holistically at all of the value that forests provide. I will next turn to Christina Pack, who's Principal Counsel at the Asian Development Bank and head of the Secretariat of the Model Forest Act Initiative.
Warm greetings from Manila. It's a great pleasure to join this important event to celebrate global forests. I would like to extend my deep gratitude to the National High Court of Brazil, to the Honorable Chief Justice Benjamin and his team, Honorable Minister Marina Silva, and the supporting organizations for bringing us together to show support for our forests. So we heard from our eminent speakers that forests are essential in solving the climate and nature crisis and ensuring inclusive and sustainable development. But inadequate national forest legal frameworks is a significant barrier in solving these complex challenges. For example, in the Asia-Pacific region, where the Asian Development Bank operates, many forest laws are outdated and no longer suitable to address current times, as Chief Justice Benjamin cited some examples of the old forest laws. Old forest laws were enacted in times when climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss were not seen as issues of imminent threat. Furthermore, existing forest laws also have not kept pace with the most recent multilateral environmental agreements and other international instruments, such as the Paris Agreement and the new generation of constitutions, as well as scientific and technological advancements. As a result, there is growing recognition that modernizing a country's forest legal framework is a critical policy tool to stop deforestation and forest degradation and enable sustainable management and utilization of forests. And indeed, at the ADB, we are seeing this trend and getting more requests for technical assistance for forest reform, which assistance is requested on an urgent basis. So how do we meet the growing demand for forest reform in the context of the urgency of the forest crisis, not enough forest expertise to meet this demand quickly, and budget constraints of various governments? So this is where the general part of the Model Forest Act that is currently being developed under the Model Forest Act initiative has become very important and timely. So with my time, I will provide a panorama of the general part of the Model Forest Act. Some people have said, how can you come up with a model law for forests? So although there are different ecosystems, cultures, legal traditions around the world, there are common features that in both the threats to forests and the norms for forest governance. So the general part of the Forest Act establishes the foundational elements of forest law that's drawn from various legal systems, including civil and common law, customary law, international treaties, and other legal instruments. It is also informed by science and technological development to advance forest law beyond the traditional framework. So the general part of the Model Forest Act, it starts with the preamble. It basically sets the scene. For example, in the context of the biodiversity and climate crisis. Next, the general part sets out the scope, which defines the what the National Forest Act should cover. For example, in the Model Forest Act, the scope provides for the effective protection, conservation, restoration, and ecologically sustainable management and use of forests and other forms of vegetation. It goes beyond forests to cover other forms of vegetation. So in essence, it's sort of a Flora Act. Of course, the scope can be tailored for the national context. So in the introduction, there's also the objectives. The objectives section lists the purposes of the National Forest Act, which are not exhaustive. For example, in the draft Model Forest Act, there's an objective for the effective protection, conservation, restoration of forests and other forms of vegetation, and also establishing a legal regime for ecologically sustainable management and use of forests and forest products through various instruments. There are other important objectives of the Draft Model Act, which again can be tailored based on the country context. And there will be a definition section, which will provide the key terms and concepts to facilitate the implementation act. And I think one of the important contributions of the Model Forest Act will be providing definitions that are informed by up-to-date scientific understanding and enable the use of technology in forest governance and promoting compliance and enforcement, which should address a lot of the high compliance costs with laws. Next, we have the principles. Principles, they perform an important educative role in the application and interpretation of the law. The Model Forest Act sets out well-recognized, such as the polluter pays principle, but also cutting-edge principles to guide the effective protection, conservation, restoration, and ecologically sustainable management and use of forests, and provides direction for how the act is to be applied and interpreted. Thereafter, we have, I think the drafting committee thought it's really important to set out some general obligations, such as general duty to protect forests, which basically, if it's adopted by states, it would basically require all state authorities and persons, both natural and legal, to exercise due care in preventing harm to forests. Another general obligation is the duty to restore forests, which basically mandates the restoration of degraded forests to their ecological health. It specifically requires those in possession or control of the forest to restore areas that have been degraded and cleared in violation of the Forest Act. Next, there's the duties of the state, and it sets out the state's obligation, including establishing transparent and effective forest governance structures at all levels. And I'll go more into the function, how important setting out the institutional arrangements is critical to the effective implementation and enforcement of forest laws. And then there's the due diligence requirement, which specifically apply to those engaged in trade or commerce involving forest resource. And next, we have a really important section of the general part of the Model Forest Act. And these are the hands, as Chief Justice Benjamin refers to. And basically, they set out the key instruments, the how, that are used to plan for and implement forest protection. conservation, restoration, sustainable management and use within a jurisdiction. So some of the key instruments include, and these are well known, for example, national forest strategies that are essentially planning documents and which should be updated and revised to maintain their effectiveness. And of course, it should incorporate the scientific understanding and changing circumstances. There's also the forest inventory system, which basically provides for systematic monitoring and assessment of forest resources. And they really serve as the scientific basis for forest management decisions and policy development. And permits and other authorizations, which is a critical instrument, which provides for the procedural and substantive requirements for authorizing activities in forests. This is a well-known instrument, the environmental impact assessment and management. And it could be in a different law, but also under the Model Forest Act, we actually thought it would be important to bring together all the different instruments that could be strewn across different legal frameworks. And another instrument is really forest governance institutions. It is a form of instrument to ensure that clear mandates, authorities, responsibilities, and coordination mechanisms are set out in the law. And of course, financial instruments and mechanisms, and I think we've heard about some of them from our opening speakers. The Act recognizes the important role of national forest law in creating the enabling environment for forest finance, critical to the conservation and restoration of forests and implementation of sustainable forest management. And then, of course, we have the implementation enforcement section, which is the teeth that Justice Benjamin mentioned earlier. And this basically outlines the specific mechanisms to ensure implementation and compliance. I think one key aspect of the Model Forest Act is that it provides for criminal, civil, administrative, all different types of sanctions in one place. Whereas in many forest legal frameworks, these, I guess, implementation enforcement tools are scattered across different legal frameworks. Additionally, the Model Forest Act Drafting Committee is considering provisions relating to forest fires, which is a pressing issue all over the world right now. We're also looking to incorporate innovative climate change provisions in the Draft Model Act. Furthermore, in addition to the substantive provisions, law and policymakers can take inspiration from the structure. The Model Forest Drafting Committee is being deliberate in the way we're laying out the structure. So the use of model text is common in private law or commercial law sphere, but it will be the first time to be used in the environmental law field. Perhaps because of the complexity of the forest laws as highlighted by our previous speakers. So ultimately, the Model Forest Act initiative will publish the general part of the Model Forest Act and the accompanying legislative guide as a valuable knowledge resource for law and policymakers in the design and enhancement of forest legal framework. The idea of model law in our context is not take it or leave it approach. It is users of the Model Forest Act and the legislative guide can take a shopping cart approach where countries can choose the relevant provisions for their country context, or they can take the model structure and the content of their national forest law, similar to the Model Forest Act, if it works for the country context. The Model Forest Act initiative believes that the Model Forest Act is an innovative way to share the essential knowledge that Justice Benjamin mentioned earlier with law and policymakers, as well as other stakeholders, to address the urgency of the forest crisis in a systematic and efficient way. So in conclusion, the Model Forest Act initiative is a great example of coordinated multilateral collaboration to advance a global public good for which leadership by the development community can have a meaningful impact. So really appreciate the great opportunity to give you a glimpse into the general part of the Model Forest Act. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Christina, for that presentation on the Model Forest Act initiative and for discussing the importance of those principles and instruments that are being incorporated into the text for the conservation and preservation and restoration and management of the forest. Our last speaker for this roundtable will be Justice Bambang Mulyono, who is a Justice of the Supreme Court of Indonesia and Dean of the Judicial Academy of Indonesia. Please, Justice Bambang.
Thank you, Professor Nick. And also thank you for Justice Antonio Benjamin for giving us the opportunity to meet online. Actually, when we talk about forests, it is about a hope. But actually, when we visit on the real side of forests, sometimes often make us feel sad. And in Indonesia, even Indonesia academics have little confidence in forestry ministry data. So sometimes there are gap data between government and civil society. And in the term of forests, judges and the law play a crucial role, I think, in safeguarding and protecting forests through law enforcement, interpretation of regulation, and their decisions. Based on annual evaluation of the working group on environmental law in the Supreme Court of Indonesia, is some of the important roles that judges and judiciary play in safeguarding forests. The first, of course, is issue about enforcement of environmental law. Environmental law can be mean that forest is a part of environmental law. Judges are responsible for enforcing of forest laws, including laws protecting forests. They ensure that violations such as illegal deforestation, forest encroachment, illegal timber trade, and deliberate forest fires are prosecuted. Judges' decision can act as a deterrent to environmental criminal or forestry criminal. Second is interpretation of law. Judges play a role in interpreting forestry laws and regulation. They can provide clear legal explanation regarding the limitation of obligation in forest management and ensure that government policy and private practice are in accordance with sustainability and conservation principles. Judges can also ensure that indigenous people and local communities' rights to forests are recognized and protected. For example, through court decision, judges can restore forest management rights to indigenous communities that have been seized or stop projects that are detrimental to local communities. And that is environmental dispute resolution. Judges play a role in resolving environmental disputes, including conflict between governments, companies, and communities over the use of forest land. Judges' decision can ensure that environmental interests and social justice are priorities. And fourth, application of principle of international environmental law. This is also part of a Model Forest Act. Judges can apply principle of international environmental law such as the precautionary principle and the principle of sustainable development in their decision. This helps ensure that court decisions are in line with a global commitment to protect forests. And first, imposition of sanction and compensation. Judges can impose strict sanction on perpetrators of environmental crimes, such as fines, revocation of permits, or criminal penalties. In addition, judges can also command individuals to pay compensation or restore damaged forests. Then supervision of government policy. Judges can review government policies related to forestry and ensure that they do not violate the law or harm the environment. For example, judges can cancel permits that have been issued illegally or stop projects that have the potential to damage forests. Then drivers of environmental law innovation. Through innovative decisions and also judicial activism, judges can encourage the development of more progressive environmental law, for example, by recognizing the rights of nature and applying the concept of corporate responsibility more strictly. And then this is about training, legal education, and awareness. Published judges' decision can raise public awareness. This is not only education for judges, but also education for public. Awareness of the importance of forest protection and the legal consequence of environmental crimes. This can encourage compliance with the law and active participation in forest conservation. And the rest is about a collaboration with other institutions. Judges can work law enforcement agencies, environmental agencies, civil societies to ensure that forestry cases are handled effectively. For example, by facilitating mediation or environmental restoration as part of the case resolution. So I think in the last statement that we need to bring the Model Forest Act as a part of the law that is a binding for United Nations member countries. Although that the principle and the norm can be applied by judges in their decision, but it is necessary to strengthen the implementation by stakeholders in government or forestry business actors. Thank you, Professor Nick. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Justice Bambang. And thank you again to all four of the roundtable participants. I just want to share a couple of the highlights of things that we've heard from all four of these great interventions before turning the time back to you to see if you have any questions for each other or further dialogue. And I think there are a lot of common points that have been brought out by these four different remarks in discussing first, as Justice Benjamin said, that old laws often fail the present and are not adequate to deal with the future. And because many legal frameworks remain fragmented, law needs to evolve, not only to reflect our changing values, but to lead the way forward. And as Patricia Kamarian-Bote also reinforced that point, that it's not enough for law to react, that law must guide and shape and drive transformations in how we think about the values that forests provide for the people and how forests serve communities and the broader community. And in introducing the Model Forest Act, Christina Pack has discussed how this is rooted in science in integrating both the recognized environmental law principles that have been developed over the past several decades, as well as new cutting-edge concepts that are essential for forests today, and strong legal instruments leading and advancing forward as the hands of the law really can provide a well-coordinated approach to ensure that law functions as an effective force for change. And it's not enough to have legislation, but as Justice Bambang has told us, that judges play an important and critical role in implementing and enforcing that forest law, and ensuring that legal protections that are written down in the law not only reflect our, prior understandings, but also can lead us forward in translating that into real world outcomes. So with that, in the spirit of roundtable, I would like to invite the four of you, if you have any reactions or comments or questions for one another, as you have heard each other speak. If any of the four of you would like to do that, please go ahead. I see Justice Benjamin perhaps maybe wants to respond.
Thank you, Professor Brian. Perhaps we could hear, benefiting from the fact that he's here with us, from Professor Ewald Andres. He is an expert on forest law, has a double background in science and law. It's quite unusual. And he's one of the very few people that I know with that double expertise.
Well, thank you, Justice Benjamin. Well, for me, it was interesting to hear these friends and colleagues speaking about the new approach. And what I want to stress is that traditional forest law was more on the utilization side of the forest. And in the most forest laws, it's still like that. And to see the forest as a whole, as a combined living system, is not mentioned in the most forest laws, or it's not recognized in the most forest laws by now. And it was Patricia Mboti. I think she opened this umbrella a little bit, but in my opinion, and it's also I think a task for the Model Forest Act initiative to strengthen this this idea of this, I would say, more comprehensive or holistic approach on forests. So maybe to all people speaking to us, do you have ideas, or maybe there are laws in your countries that have already new instruments on this more holistic approach? Or are there concrete concepts around that you mentioned or that you realized already? Or are there none of these instruments found in the traditional forest laws? So that's my point and my question to all people speaking to us. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ewald, for that. Please, Justice Benjamin.
Well, I will begin. But before I address the point raised by Professor Andres, I should perhaps emphasize that it is important that we protect not just forests, but flora. In many ecosystems, the canopy depends on the vegetation that is around it. I could give you a number of examples in which pollinators of the canopy are beetles. And we know beetles are not good in flying, they are good in jumping. So in order to reach the top of the canopy, they need the lower vegetation. So it is important that we, in drafting legislation for the protection of forests, we expanded to include native vegetation. And that's why this is something that Professor Christina Pack can expand on. But that's why we, in the Model Forest Act, protect forests and all other types of native vegetation. So this is quite important. And my second point, again, based on the interventions by Professor Patricia Mimbotti, Dr. Christina Pack, and Justice Bang Bang, is that in drafting new forest legislation, we have to include the legal principles that should orient not just the interpretation of the different norms in the text for the agencies, for the judges, or for the stakeholders, but also to try to envision new legal principles that can be inferred from the international norms, other areas of environmental law, or other legal disciplines in a true dialogue of legal sources. Because forests, as a consequence of their diversity around the globe, would require that we empower judges with legal principles in order to face that diversity. It is impossible, or perhaps even not wise, for the legislator to discipline every little bit of this complex mosaic of global forests. And that's why we need legal principles. But I stop here, and I would like to hear from my other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Justice Benjamin, for those thoughtful remarks. Maybe we can go through the roundtable discussants again, unless any of the rest of you particularly like to chime in first, but I could turn to Patricia, and then to Christina, and then to Justice Bambam.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think the issues that Justice Benjamin raises are very critical for a new forest act. And it's going to be critical that we look to see different jurisdictions. I think from the place where I am most familiar with the laws, they are now trying to align their forest legislation with their constitutions. And many of the constitutions are New Age constitutions where you have the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But it looks like forests really are challenging the legal framework because of what is discovered about forests that is needed to be addressed. Because now what you have are instruments, for instance, dealing with carbon markets, which are probably under a forest act, but the root of the provision in the forest legislation may not be as clear. So the Model Forest Act initiative is going to pave the way for a holistic way of dealing with the forests where you have them recognized maybe even in constitutions as critical habitats, so that then you draw from that to have a Forest Act, and then you have the other laws that draw on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christina, do you have any comments in response?
Yes, actually, I'd like to follow on from Professor Patricia Kamiri-Mubede's comments about, I guess, the fragmentation of laws. That's sort of a very difficult issue and challenging for, I guess, compliance and enforcement, because I think, as Professor Patricia pointed out, for example, there's many different types of laws that converge on forests. It would be simple if we had sort of like a simpler approach of a framework, maybe framework forest law, like there's the trend of framework climate change laws. But the reality is still, it touches on many areas of the laws. So I think, even, for example, carbon markets, it's in, it could be under a Climate Change Act. There's also provisions in the Forest Act because if it's relevant to forest-based carbon projects. I think, so the fragmentation of different facets of forest law is in sort of like a legal framework, which is a compilation of many different areas of the law, which makes things difficult. So I think the value of the general part of the Model Forest Act is really bringing together the different areas of the law in one place for at least the user to see how all the different laws kind of relate, from the EIA laws to, climate change laws to carbon market laws. How it ultimately gets transfused, adopted, it depends on the legal system and where it's placed. But I think it does make law and policymakers think about all the related sectors, multidisciplinary nature, stakeholder nature of forests. So I'm hoping that the Model Forest Act can be that source of place where people can kind of see that ecosystem approach play out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Justice Bambang.
Thank you. I think I don't have many comments, but just for information that the Indonesian forestry law will be amended in this year or perhaps next year. Therefore, I think MOFI or community organization that care about forests need to monitor so that if can be regulated holistically and not become a deviation from forest management, which actually legalizes forest destruction, because the regulation made do not apply sustainable forestry norms. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Bambang. Well, I want to thank you all again for that valuable discussion about what the role of the Model Forest Act initiative can be, and the importance of letting of really developing a greater, a more holistic understanding of what the forests are valued for, and making sure that that is incorporated into the law, recognizing that that is a part of the leadership of the law. And I think that connects back to what the first speakers at this event said, where Minister Marina Silva reminded us that leadership is done through example. Leadership is not aspiration, it's action. And it will only really work with cross-cutting, sustained commitment over time from a variety of stakeholders and institutions. And the law is an important and critical aspect of that. And the judiciary is an important aspect of that in ensuring that the law is implemented and enforced, in really emphasizing, as Director General Gretel Aguilar said, that the law has to be written in a way that serves the people, and not, written to serve a particular segment or slice or institution, but rather serving the people as a whole. And this global effort to reform forest law, I think, is an important way of implementing that sentiment. So thank you to all of you who participated in this roundtable. I'd like to turn the time back over to Justice Benjamin for his further remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Bryna. Thank you for chairing this panel. Many thanks for your leadership, for being such a good American Brazilian or Brazilian American. You are one of the best experts on Brazilian law in the United States, and we do appreciate that very much. It's time to close. We are right on time. Congratulations to everyone. I would like, on behalf of my court, Superior Tribunal de Justiça, the National High Court of Brazil, STJ, STJ, my colleagues, the justice, the ministers, os ministros, to thank all the speakers, the keynote speakers, the participants of the round table. This is a conversation that was summarized today. It's much more complex, as you could see from each one of our presentations. Each participant emphasized the complexity of the theme. This is a common aspect of all interventions. But what is important is that we use this type of dialogue, global dialogue, to stress the importance of forests and especially to stress the relevance of enacting good laws for the protection of forests. But good laws alone are not enough. We need good laws that have good implementation, as Professor and Justice Bang Bang mentioned in his intervention. On that note of the need to have good laws with good implementation, I thank you all, the institutions that participate in this event, and I will list them: the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, the Supreme Court of Indonesia, the United Nations Environmental Program, IUCN, the United Nations Forum on Forests, the World Commission on Environmental Law, the Asian Development Bank, the Secretariat of MOFE, ICEL, the International Council of Environmental Law. On the Brazilian side, the Conference of Chief Justice of State Supreme Courts of Brazil, the Brazilian Association of State Judges, AMB, the Brazilian Association of Federal Judges, AJUFI, the National Association of Federal Public Prosecutors, and the National Confederation of State Prosecutors. And to all the participants that are watching us on YouTube and those that have joined the conversation here by Zoom. Many thanks. Have a good day, and until the next dialogue. And many thanks to our interpreters and to the technicians from the National High Court of Brazil, STJ, that enable us to be here today. Thank you to all.